We had over 800 people give
No way.
matched pre and post sample.
Oh my
It's
God.
an insane data set. Their consciousness is not there. It's gone. It goes somewhere. Where does it go?
You made it. You made it back to another episode of What I Wish I Knew, a Cancer Starter Kit podcast. So obviously on this podcast, we really try to share anything that could possibly make your cancer diagnosis and what comes after a little bit easier. And what we're talking about today is something that really changed the entire trajectory of my diagnosis. And I was first introduced to the whole idea of Joe Dispenza meditations and kind of the practices that go along with it through my coach and healer, Rick Walia. And then upon learning more and more, I got so invested and it changed my whole perspective on healing. So I'm so excited to talk to our guest today, Dr. Hemal Patel. And we are really going to just dive into what this means on a deeper level and how it corresponds to all of the science and data behind it as well. So he's a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and the vice chair of research in the Department of Anesthesiology. And his team has partnered with Joe Dispenza to really dive into the research more on what's actually happening in the body through all of these experiences. So, Dr. Patel, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too. So, when you introduce yourself to people, because I know you go to so many different events, whatever, what do you focus on the most in your long bio?
I think it's just the name, right? So we were just talking about this in San Diego. Someone was walking with me and said, "What do you prefer someone call you?" Like Hemal, right? Do you want people to call you Dr. Patel? I'm like, no, I don't really have an attachment to a title. And some people do, right? They spend a lot of their time and energy getting that degree, and they want to be honored for it by being called doctor. There are people in my lab that continue to feel like they have to respect that status and the hierarchy. And so there's a guy who I've been working with since 2012. I know his family, yet he still calls me professor, right? And I'm like, I think you can call me Hemal now. And it just doesn't feel comfortable. And so I think I tend to leave it at whatever feels comfortable to you, right? And I'm totally fine with Hemal.
Okay. Well, Hemal, then. The first time I got exposed to your work was I was invited to the premiere documentary of The Source, It's Within You, that screened at UCSD. And it was like the most insane screening to watch ever, honestly, because it was like putting all of the science and data behind what meditation and these transformative experiences are doing. Can you tell people who haven't seen the documentary just what it's logging and kind of what was the most surprising part of the research that came out?
Yeah, that was an interesting week. So we actually had done an LA premiere a couple nights before that. And it was at this small theater that Mr. Brainwash has a
Mr. Brainwash. I've never
art and a museum in Beverly Hills. And it was an amazing space to do the premiere. There's a couple hundred people that can fit into this tiny theater. And then we were, angling for the thing at UCSD. And this was the first event that had completely sold out the amphitheater, and it holds like 2,000 people. And it was amazing to see that space filled and just people out and about and doing their thing. So Source is about the original research that we were doing. And one of the things that happens with productions like this, it takes time to come together. The research moves so fast that it was so old, what was presented in that documentary, but it captures the start, right? This idea of what were we trying to identify? How does the mind and body connect, right? And this was one of the big things that we were focused on in Source is how are we thinking about this process, and can we start putting some science to it? And it does a really nice job of intertwining the hard science with then the soft stories of the people that were featured in there that had gone through transformations, individuals that had transformed from a mental perspective, from biological perspectives, from a cancer perspective as well. And it shows that there's a human side to the research, right? That there's not just numbers, but there's people behind those numbers and how things change. The science continues to evolve, right? We're doing things that are so far beyond what we were thinking when we first started in this space that now we're starting to think about, well, what's happening in the room, right? That there's an energy that created by all of these individuals in that space that has an impact on what's happening. And the limit right now is, how do you measure that? How do you quantify it? How do you put some structure around that? And we've got some ideas of how to do that, which we're starting to position into research events now.
Yeah. And I feel like you guys did such a good job of just getting samples and all of these data, biometrics of people before and then after the retreat.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about like what changes you saw before someone walked into a retreat, did the week long and came out?
Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to define early are, what are non-invasive things you could capture in individuals? And so I have a slide I show in talks that it's called the human collectome, right? This idea of what can you collect off of a human? There's a lot of things on there that are not on there that I can think of that we will eventually go to, but essentially the starting point were wearable devices, right? Could you put a device on someone that then tracks them 24/7, right? And the idea is that they put it on, they forget about it, and we're really capturing raw information that they're not trying to consciously change in a weird kind of way. I think people get fixated, right? If they're in a study, they want to do well and they're hyper focused on doing well. So we want to put something on that just captures their activity, their sleep, their heart rate variability as a long-term dynamic measure. And so this was a tough thing to start, right? We worked with a company and a group at Harvard that was doing this. The first study we did that was a big study called Quantum, this quest to analyze 1,000 humans meditating. So the reason for doing this was we would do these really targeted studies on specific individuals, whether they were healthy controls or specific diseases we were looking at. We'd have 800-900 people at an event volunteer to be in a study, and we would only be able to pick 30 to 50 people because we were doing so many things on them. I would get bombarded at events saying, what do I have to do to get into your study? Because I've tried now 4 times. And so I thought about this and I'm like, okay, we've got to figure out a way to let everyone into something. And so this is where Quantum came from. And so the only thing you had to agree to do was wear a Garmin device and fill out some surveys. And most people would do that. The biological capture we started to start getting at that point, this was 2022. And microbiome wasn't really, it was starting to take off, but people weren't really doing this in this space very much. And so there was a lot of worry about, well, who would really give us poop samples? And
I would.
it turned out at this thing, we recruited 967 people into the study.
To do the poop sample?
To do.
Oh, okay.
And we took bets on how many people would actually give us poop samples.
Oh, wait, can I guess?
Sure.
Is it like, I feel like it's pretty high, but I'm going to say like 412.
Well, so I think you were higher than what most people. I was guessing about 200 people would give us something. I think Joe's like, dude, I don't know if what's going to happen for sure, right? We had over 800 people give matched pre and post samples.
Oh,
it's an insane data set. So now you can look at how their microbiome looks before the event and what happens 7 days later.
So cool.
And we're starting to see some really dramatic shifts and changes in that. Since then, I mean, this was 2022, we probably have stool samples from over 5,000 individuals before and after an event. And we've done some follow-up longitudinal studies where now we have a small cohort where we actually have about 180, 200 people where we have poop samples every 2 months after they've left a retreat for a year.
And is that if they keep up with the meditation?
That's the idea, right?
Okay.
They haven't started analyzing that data, but the question becomes, how long does that effect of the week-long event actually last?
Yeah.
And can you track it in a blood sample, and can you track it in a microbiome sample? So we're starting to do some stuff around the long-term effects of the events as well. But what we sort of came up with in this first event was 1,000 people, right? We have 1,000 people, and I knew that it was going to be something magical about the data set. When we started actually looking, it turned out that there were 50 diseases that were represented in those 1,000 individuals. And so now you can look at how one intervention, one drug, the Joe Dispenza week-long event, impacts 50 different things that we as a human species have to deal with, and how it changes in a week-long pattern, right? And so this gave us this huge thing that most drug companies can't do. I mean, I've trained as a pharmacologist, and it's typically one pill for one disease, and you spend a couple $1 billion bringing that to market. Now we're spending peanuts to look at how one intervention changes 50 different things. One of the things that we started doing, and it's sort of interesting we're talking now, is the first disease that we focused on was cancer. We thought that this would be a thing that we could make a pretty quick mark in, because there was a particular type of individual that would come to an event. We see lots of different cancers, but the majority of the people that come are women with stage 3, stage 4 breast cancer. And so if you have a large grouping, then you can start doing analyses of changes and things we see. And so we started seeing shifts towards a healthy microbiome in these women that had cancer that were going through the week-long event. In 7 days, their microbiome was shifting more like what the healthies look like than what the cancer looked like before they started the event. So you can actually create predictive algorithms that show that you can differentiate cancer from healthy at the beginning. In 7 days, those algorithms fall apart because they've shifted so much, you can no longer tell that they look that way. So there's evidence to suggest at a very preliminary level that a week-long event does something to change your biology, that you may be better shifted to get chemotherapy or radiation or go through a Western protocol for meditation. And this is not something groundbreaking new we've discovered. It's just we're putting real hard science to something that's people have known about for a long time, right? And one of the things, I was talking to someone this past week, and it was this notion that you either live in one camp or the other, right? You believe in alternative medicine, and that's really what you want to do, and you want to rub some oil and stuff on things, or go sit in a room and be at peace and will away things that are biological in nature. Possibly. But then there's another camp that doesn't believe any of that, and they really want pills and chemo and radiation and the Western way of doing things. And I think of it from the perspective of everything is available. Why not throw the kitchen sink at this thing and just see? You just never know what combination of things will work out. And I think this is where the research is really headed, at least in the cancer space, is to see how we can learn from the week-long Joe events of what mind-body changes happen. And then could we interject some element of Western therapies into this effect and actually see a change, an augmented synergistic thing? The way we're trying to do this is we capture samples from individuals, right? So every individual that goes through the week-long event, one of the other things we've started to do is we collect blood. We collect a lot of blood, and blood has a lot of information in it, right? You can see a change from one point to another point. You can track it over time. But the other unique feature of blood is you can transfer it to other living systems that then respond in a unique way to then tell you, is there a change that's happened? And so the way we've diluted this down is, can we now culture cancer cells in the lab? And so these cells have never heard of Joe Dispenza meditation. They haven't gone to a retreat. They haven't seen a YouTube video. So there's no bias in these cells, but they had cancer. Mm-hmm. And you take the information that an individual creates at a week-long event, and you put this onto this cancer cell, and you see if that information reacts with cancer in a unique way. And it does, right? We see changes in energetic profiles, we see changes in growth. And so the question now becomes, could you add in a small non-toxic dose of chemotherapy to that? And would you augment that effect even more? And so we're trying to put some ideas around this idea of combining Eastern, what's traditionally thought of as Eastern thought and meditative practices with Western practices as well. And we'll see.
And when you say information and how it interacts with the cell, is that like the blood interacting with the cell, or is that like what was covered in the documentary about like the people being around the cells?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? So the limit right now we have is what's the information. So an individual that's meditating, their mind is creating a shift in their body, and one of the primary principles that we have in terms of a hypothesis is that when you start to think differently, your biochemistry changes. So the things that your gut is secreting is changing. So all of that chemistry is now a different chemistry. The things that your mitochondria are making, because your energetic shift is happening as well, is different. Your genetics, your epigenetics is shifting as well. And so now you're seeing different things appear in your blood as a tracker of what your mind has done to your body. And so I think that is the information that an individual creates. The question becomes, is that information valuable from a biological perspective? And the way to test this is in a completely controllable system where we don't have any of these other things, right? A cell that's cancer that we can then change by putting this new information on. The big question then becomes is what part of that information is actually changing that effect? This then takes multi-million dollars to then dissect out and find. And we have a blueprint for how to do this, right? When this first started, the first event we were at was Indian Wells in 2020. This was February of 2020. And then something happened in March of 2020. The world shut down. And so we had to figure out what to do. And the labs that were allowed to come in and work in the space were labs that were focused on COVID. And so we started a program of looking at how mind-body impacts COVID disease. We did this international survey, and we got like almost 3,000 responses back, where we were looking at what is your practice of meditation and how have you experienced the COVID disease and pandemic? And what we came up with in this is when you do this analysis of the survey, the more people meditated, the less COVID symptomology they had and the less infectivity they had as well. So there was evidence in a world population that suggested that mind can manipulate how a virus impacts the body, right? One of the simple thing that is present in the literature is that mindfulness and meditation and these practices change immune functionality. And so this was prevalent. The thing we wanted to do is then directly test whether information that a meditator creates at an event actually changes the trajectory of disease in a dish that you could manipulate. And so we had blood samples from all of these individuals that were meditating before and after, and we created a cell-based assay. And so we had a lung cell that we were looking at. And so this, if the virus goes in, this is the first cell that would impact. We created a stripped-down version of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So basically, it was a non-pathogenic virus that had the spike proteins on it. And we basically gutted the inside, and the inside had a red reporter. And so when you add this, what we call a pseudo-spike SARS-CoV-2 virus onto a cell, this lung cell, you can tell if the lung cells are infected because they turn red. And so that we did a very simple experiment. What happens if you incubate the lung cells with plasma from these meditators before and after the event? And so they got a couple hour of incubation. And so whatever these factors that these individuals were creating got secreted into their body. We captured them in their plasma. We put that onto these cells. And then we came in and infected them with the pseudovirus, and we just looked to see if they turn red. Turns out that the meditators at the end of the week, when you put the plasma on after 7 days, there were less red cells. So if there's less red in the cell, it suggests that there's a factor that these meditators were creating that prevented the virus from getting into the cell. And so we actually then did a deep dive and figured out what some of those factors were. And it turns out one of them is a protein called SERPINA5, which has this interesting biology where it antagonizes one of the enzymes that SARS-CoV-2 uses to get into a cell. And what this factor that was highly elevated in meditators does is it inhibits this protein. And so now the SARS-CoV-2 virus sits on the top of the cell and it can't get in, right? Because you've disengaged this molecular pathway. And who knew that a meditator, without being, infected or all these things, were just sitting in a room for 35 hours meditating, created this protein that has this amazing effect. And this is, if people want to read about it, I'll send you the link to the paper. It's been published for a couple of years. And it was the first foray into this space, that the mind does create a body that then creates some resiliency, right, in our human condition. And it was around this time of the pandemic.
That's amazing to just be like, okay, before the retreat, it's more red. After, it's less red. Like, it's just to make that simple like comparison is so powerful. And I remember in the documentary as well, but there was an experiment, and tell me if this is accurate, but it was like you guys had you had one set of petri dishes with cancer cells, and on the entire other side of the building were another set of very similar cancer cells in a petri dish.
Yeah.
And then you guys had the meditators slash like healers be around the one set of cancer cells, and then like those ones didn't grow as much as the other ones.
Yep.
Was that accurate?
It is. And we've been trying to repeat this. There's other groups that are interested in this. It's this concept of the biofield, right? That there's a field that we create and it's full of energy, and that energy has information. And we're trying to capture what that is. And this is one way to do it, right? Living systems that aren't biased in any way. And could you then manipulate them? And we're in the lab, we're playing with a lot of living systems that are this way. Cells are the basic building block of life. And they're an easy way to do this because you can have lots of diseases and other things that you can manipulate in cells. The other thing that the lab is focusing on right now are these small microscopic worms called nematode, right? C. elegans. And they're a model species that people use for aging, different disease models, and things like that. And so we have a huge group in the lab that's focusing on these worms as a model species to see how mind-body interact in this biofield space. And then we're starting to tap into plants. I mean, plants have living energy, and they are probably more complicated than we are. And they have to sit where we plant them, right? They can't move like most things. And we think that there's information that they're creating as well. And so could we use these non-manipulatable things they're not seeing TVs and other things that they're biased by information. And could we then use these unbiased systems to really learn what the energy in that room is being created? And if there is an energy that's created, right?
Yeah.
I don't know right now if what I believe yet. I know that there's something that happens at a week-long event that I have not yet figured out. And it's unexplainable or describable. There's a change and transformation that happens in individuals. We see it at a biological level, but it's more than just that biological change. I think there's something, I'm left with the word magical.
That's the only word.
It's a non-scientific word, but there's something magical about what happens in that space. And I want to figure it out, right? And Joe and I talk about this all the time. How do we figure this out? And how do we find out how to do this? And the limitation in science is I don't think the machines, the devices, the things exist yet to be able to capture that.
Yeah, that's so hard because right now we just have numbers and like quantitative data to prove these things. But you guys have already done such a good job of logging what you can. Can you just walk me through what a week-long Joe Dispenza retreat looks like? Like, what is kind of the daily schedule? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a secret usually, so I'm not going to tell you much about it.
Okay,
I think one of the things that I want to honor is the fact that it is an experience that an individual goes through. I think there's lots of information out there. Don't look into it, right? One of the elements of going through a new experience is you want the surprise and the novelty of everything. I think if you know, then there's this anticipation and it ruins the experience. There's an anxiety that it creates. And so I'll honor the Joe space, and I won't tell you much about it. It is a week where you can look in our papers. We describe it as reconceptualization. So there is the latest paper that came out describes it in 3 components, right? There's this reconceptualization phase where you learn a lot of new information. So it challenges what you think about and how you think about things, which is important, right? In order to change, you have to change how you see the world. And there's a huge component of that. And you spend a lot of time during the week doing that. The second phase is the meditation. There is a lot of meditation. It's when I went to my first retreat in Orlando in 2021, I thought it was going to be a vacation. I'm like, oh, we'll get to go to Disney World. We'll get to hang out. I'm like, what is going on? It's like 12, like long days, right? You start very early and you end in the evening. And it is a packed day full of learning and putting that learning to work during meditations. So it's about 35 hours of meditating that you're doing throughout this week. And then there's this third component that we describe as open label placebo, this idea of these healing things that you do. And you really work during the week to learn how to do that as an individual and then as a group. And there's some amazing things that happen when you collectively turn your energy outside of you to someone else. And we're seeing some dramatic shifts. And I think there's an element of socialization that's involved in this. And there's an element of collective energy that creates this space. And we're trying to study and understand that component. And so those are really the three things that happen. And it is a full-on week where people go 0 to 60 very quickly. I think it takes a skeptic and someone who's new to this probably a couple days to really warm up to this. And I've seen arcs of different stories. Some people on the first meditation, they're in, right? They're like, all right, I'm going to throw myself completely into this. And there are people like me who push and resist for days. I mean, it took me 3 days to really get into that retreat. It was, and once I got in, it was transformative. I cried like the whole rest of the week, and it was cathartic and amazing. And just it changed a lot of my behaviors for a time, right? Not forever, but it showed the potential of what I could be. And I think this is something we're looking at as well. What's the arc of someone's change in this? And new people that are in this space, we call them novices, right? They've never been to a live retreat, and this is a real charge to their system. They have to think and do all these things, and it's a commitment.
A 35-hour commitment at least.
Yeah. Oh, the whole week, if you time it all out, I think it's about 50 plus hours of active participation in the retreat. So it's one of the criticisms we get in our paper, because a lot of the papers are looking at individuals pre-post change. And the easy argument a scientist will make is, well, it's a vacation effect, right? The fact that you're not working, that you're at a resort, checked out of your normal life, that's why you were seeing such a transformation. I can tell you it's not a vacation. It does not feel like a vacation. We actually have a paper we're working on right now that's going to come out soon, where we actually did vacationing controls. And these were individuals that were at the resort sites across a couple different events that we were looking at. They were not in the room. And so then they become this perfect conduit to look at for what happens when someone is in the room versus someone just going through the retreat at the retreat site, but not in the room itself. And there are dramatic differences between those two experiences. So it's not a vacation effect, right? There's something about going through that mind change, that body change, that transformation that really changes who and what someone is.
I love how you're like, oh, that's your argument? We'll prove how that's not wrong.
Yeah. And it's not like we as scientists are ignoring it.
Of course.
We totally know, but it is so hard to convince someone to not go to a retreat and just hang out at a resort and be like, you're going to be our control. And you almost have to tell them, and it's the truth, that they are the most important part of the scientific experiment. Yeah. In order for us to show what's happening at the week-long event, we need people who are not at the week-long event, right? Mm-hmm. As the experience of it. So
that's so powerful. Would you say that all meditations aren't the same? Like, as far as they're not all equal, they're not all going to have this effect. It's the certain type of technique that you're doing.
I think there's some truth to that. This is something that we're dissecting right now. So we did a study called Mystic. And so Mystic was a randomized study where people got assigned to a particular meditation for the week. And it took us 2.5 years to collect the data. It was 1,000 people that are in this study again, right? We keep circling around this 1,000. I think it's a good number.
It is a good number because it's like provable.
Right. It's a lot of people that then you can take lots of data in. So when do they get assigned? So they sign up for the study before the event starts. When the event comes, they come to the registration area for the research. When they come to registration, they get randomly assigned to one of the meditations for the week. And the week has anywhere from 17 to 19 meditations you're doing. We collect a blood sample from them before the week-long starts. And so that becomes our base. And then we collect they go to that particular meditation they're assigned to. Usually about a half an hour before that meditation, they get a EEG cap that gets put on their head. And so we're measuring their electrical activity during that meditation that's happening. And then right after that meditation, we get the second blood sample. And so now we're trying to see what happens immediately after you have these crazy experiences. And then we capture a blood sample 24 hours later. And so we see, is that effect lasting? Is it waning? Is it doing something else? Are we accumulating something? And so we have these three collections, but then we have 1,000 of these EEG maps. And so when you look at 1,000 people across a week, every one of those 17 to 19 meditations, there's 50 to 60 people that have done them. And so now we can ask these crazy questions about, well, what happens during meditation 1 versus meditation 19? Is there an effect of someone experiencing the whole week? Are there individuals that start and finish at the same place, or is there a trajectory that someone has as well? And then ultimately, is there a blood factor that changes as a consequence of going through this? The other thing that they do at the end of their meditation is they fill out this thing called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire. This is something I'm really interested in, and it goes. I mean, I've had faith journeys that go in different spaces. I grew up as a Hindu. I converted to a Catholic in my adult life, and so I've had this interesting sort of arc of spirituality and belief and God and all these other things. And one of the things that sort of fascinates me about people's belief structures is this concept of the miracle, right? And how do you attain something like that? And I think there's some element of having a mystical experience that ties with this. And I think scientists sort of write off these mystical experiences as chemical events that are happening in your brain, and it's like a dreamlike state and other things. I think there's something deeper there, right? That someone is really interacting with a different plane level spirituality that takes them to certain places. And I've had really small fleeting experiences with mysticism and just weird, crazy things that happen to you. And we want to see if there's a tie with people who have mystical experiences and ones that really change biologically. This paper that just got published, we were trying to correlate these changes in the brain using fMRI to a mystical experience. And there was a slight correlation. So individuals that had these mystical experiences had more brain connectivity changes and other things. So it suggests that there is this interesting relationship between what you experience in a meditation and what comes out from a biological perspective. And so if that's true, then meditations are not equal, right? And the individual is not equal as well. So it's really about the experience of what that meditation is, and it's the experiencer that goes through that experience, and that all comes together.
So what did the difference look like between 1 out of 19 of those different meditations? Like, what did you get?
So we're just starting to scratch the surface on it. If you can imagine looking at 1,000 of these things here, we're capturing 30. So these things are collecting data. I'm trying to think what we set them at. I think it was 2,000 hertz. So it's collecting 2,000 data points per second for an hour, hour and a half on each one of the meditations. And so now you have to spend 30 of these channels capturing that information. The cool thing about this is we're not only capturing the brain, but each one of these caps has a heart signal as well. So we're looking at how the heart and the brain connect. And this is something that Joe's very interested in, we're as well. The heart is connected, right? We have all these things that we tie to the heart, this feeling, this love, this idea of a broken heart, this idea of something that has this sort of mental aspect as well. And so we think that there's a connective aspect that ties these two organs together.
And do you think that people have to go to a week-long Joe Dispenza event to really see change, or can they do these meditations at home? And
I mean, one of the places to explore are these stories of transformation. And there are a number of these stories of transformation on their website. And I don't know if there's a YouTube channel, something that if you just type in stories of transformation, Joe Dispenza to come up. A lot of these individuals have massive changes, and they've never been to a Joe event. They've read the books, they've done the meditations. This is something we're interested in looking at as well. Do you have to actually physically be present to create an effect? And we're designing a study, hopefully later this year, to dissect this away. Could you look at individuals that are in their home setting, that are bombarded by their home situation, right? Their kids, their work, their life. But could they do the meditations during a week-long event in their home environment? And would they experience the same biological shift that someone who's vacationing, right, living out of their home environment, but at this week-long event and immersed? I suspect that the effect is going to be much stronger for the person that's at the retreat, right? That they don't have these distractions. But the other thing that I don't think you get in the individual setting is the group environment. And one of the things we've really seen is that there is this transformation that happens in individuals that's driven by your interaction with other individuals. We as a species are a social species, yet I'm an introvert and I love being in a space where no one else is around. I would prefer that, but I know that I grow and become a better version of myself when I'm challenged by people around me, yet we'll avoid it, right? And so what this allows you to do is not avoid it. It puts you into that situation. And I've seen transformation. So one of the things I do as a scientist, and we're really good at just people watching, right? And watching things. We're observers. And so at a lot of events, I'll just kind of sit and I'll do some of the meditations, but I'll kind of just sit and watch and see what are things I want to study, what are things I notice. I was at an event and I think it was Marco Island, which is one of my favorite places because it's right on the beach and it's just this peaceful environment to be in. And I had just landed, and it's not an easy journey to get from San Diego to Marco Island. You got to fly through Texas, which is always a pain in the ass to true. Depending on the time of year, there's weather. Like right now, I've heard Dallas Fort just canceled a ton of flights.
Yeah.
And so Dallas is this bane of existence of a lot of people who travel. So I get there. It's been a long day of travel, and I'm waiting to check in. And I don't like to cut lines or anything like that. So I'm just waiting and watching. And this woman comes to the front desk, and she's screaming at the person that's the
front desk person.
And this person is like, I don't know what I did, but sorry. And she's screaming about something that's wrong with her room. And the rest of the week, I saw this person in the event. I'm like, oh my God. I saw her at the end of the week and just observing how it was completely love and peace and joy. And she was apologizing to people for her behavior early in the week. And I have to suspect that some element of that is what she achieved herself as an individual in her transformation. But a lot of it is the social interaction, because you're eating meals with people, lunch, dinner, breaks and things. You're sitting next to people, you're interacting, you're engaging, you're sharing stuff. In my first event, you randomly sit next to people. There was this woman who was in our study. I didn't even know she was in our study. And we had a great day together talking about just stupid stuff. And I learned that she meditates like 5 hours a day. And I actually went back and looked at her data. She closes her eyes and she goes into gamma state like that, in a second, something that takes me 30, 40 minutes of practice to get to. She closes her eyes and her brain goes instantly into this state. And I got to spend an entire day with her, and hopefully she rubbed off.
I know, you're like, let's hang out more, shall we?
And so we're doing studies like this, right? So one of our studies that we've done is called the PAIR study. And one of the big interests in my lab is aging. People are narcissistic, and so this is a good space to be in. Longevity. People want to live forever, which is not a good thing to achieve. I think
it should be the quality of life.
You want to live well for as long as you can. But we're also interested in the longevity thing. And so the idea is I've been watching this series on the blue zones, and we've been always interested in blue zones as an archetype for how to live well and long. And so if you look at places in Japan and Italy and Loma Linda, right?
I grew up in Redlands, so it's like neighbors,
right? Yeah. It rubs off on you. They do crazy weird things. In Okinawa, they drink herbal teas and all these things. And in Loma Linda, it's this Christian religious background.
Seventh-day Adventists, and we're all vegetarian and all have the same schedule and go on hikes and stuff.
The common feature that we see across, I think, these blue zones is the social interactions, right? No matter where you are in that blue zone, if you're drinking tea or not, you're drinking it with someone else, right? Yeah. There's this interaction. There's these intergenerational experiences that you have as well. A lot of Asian cultures have this, where you have a family that lives on different floors of a house and everyone's there, the grandparents, the great grandparents, and it's this larger dynamic social structure. When you have that, there's resiliency, there's less stress about money, about food, about other things, and it allows you to be mentally well, I think, in a unique perspective. As we did this study where I call it mental parabiosis. So could you connect two individuals? And there were the parabiosis experiments were done decades ago at Berkeley and other places, where they took two animals. One was a young animal and one was a really old animal, and they connected them together by their circulatory systems. And
The circulatory system being just like
Yeah.
how do they do that?
they exchanged their basic
Or just have tubes like
And
connected?
so they basically circulated
Oh
blood
my-
between those two systems. And what they noticed is that when you do this pairing, the old animal becomes physiologically younger. The younger animal becomes a little bit older, but the effect on the old is dramatic, right? That you reverse aging. And so this thought that there was actually circulating factors that youthfulness creates that you could transfer, and this is where all this exosome stuff and things come, platelet transfer and from young to old kinds of things.
You mean what like actors are doing?
There are a lot of that. People paying thousands of dollars to do this. And so I had this harebrained idea that, well, I'm sure if I asked people if I could connect them together, they would let me, but we didn't want to go that far. And so the idea was, could we mentally connect them together? And so we looked at individuals that were 3 decades apart, put them together, and they transform, right? They transform in lots of unique, cool kinds of ways. This is a study we're working on. We're still tweaking with a couple of the things that we're trying to identify. But it's this social environment that you create when someone has to share with someone an experience. It transforms them in dramatic ways. Some of these pairs are still interacting years later. Right?
And so it's transforming them on the cognitive level, or also like
we see cognitive changes, we see blood changes. We think that their biological age is going to become younger. We're looking at that data right now. It's just been sent off for sequencing, and we'll know epigenetics very soon.
Wow.
Biochemically, it looks like the older person becomes biochemically more young. We actually see a shift that looks like it's a more young biochemistry that they're creating.
And biochemistry, looking at what markers, like
just
kind of like
everything,
proteins, right? And
we did proteins, but the metabolomics is basically side chemical reactions that are happening in your body. So all the chemistry that you're creating looks like it's shifting to a more young chemistry.
And then the older or the younger person, are they aging faster?
They're not.
Okay.
You see a benefit where they're possibly becoming more mature, which is good, right? And
no, I'm just kidding.
I hope so. And I think that with the cognitive aspects, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to a young brain versus an old brain as well.
Totally. And I feel like the older person just has to like think a little faster and is more challenged than being in isolation or
and people are doing this in Alzheimer's and other settings as well. There's lots of community clinics where someone with Alzheimer's gets paired with a caregiver, and when you get paired with a caregiver, someone who's there to help guide you through this experience, you have a much deeper change in effect, right? That you start to remember more things, and you have a change in your disease progress because there is this change in a mental state that you see.
Yeah. I remember too in the documentary, you talked about how when you first came to your colleagues about the research you were doing, there was a feeling of, I'm putting my career on the line for this as far as reputation and all of that. Can you tell me more about kind of what that was like going to them with this mystical but also scientific approach to what you're researching?
I think, we haven't abandoned the what my lab, some people in the lab called hard science as well. I think we're taking a lot of what people would consider soft science and applying really hard science to this, right? To actually identify a factor in the blood that prevents the virus from going in. It's hard science, where it's biochemistry, it's using mass spec, it's using the traditional tools that a scientist would use. But there was this fear, right, of am I going into a space where it's going to be hard to publish papers? And it's been hard. That COVID paper, because it challenged a lot of paradigms in the world, was one of the hardest papers to publish. I don't know how many journals we sent this to. And it wasn't that we were saying that you should abandon vaccines and just meditate to get rid of viruses. But again, this idea of combining the Western and Eastern approaches is a way to think about augmenting and synergizing the effect. But it's a challenge because I think it goes against what scientists think real science is. That there is, can the mind really change the body? And we're pushing the envelope in lots of directions. I think that there is this movement and shift towards this idea that the brain does create a body, right? It creates a chemistry, and the way you think can change your biology in a unique kind of way. I think the growth of epigenetics is a way to suggest a path forward in all this, right? This idea of DNA makes RNA makes protein is what we're dogmatically taught in high school and all these other places, and that's how you think. Epigenetics challenges all of that. Now this suggests that the DNA you're born with may not mean that this is the proteins you get out of it, but there may be environmental factors, and one of the things that you can self-create is a mental state, right? By meditating, you're changing the way you're thinking. Thinking is then changing your biochemistry. That biochemistry is now interacting with your genetics to then layer on top of that DNA to cause methylation changes or to cause histone changes or to secrete factors that then change how your genes express. And one of the things we were exploring in that documentary was this idea of exosomes, right? This release of what people thought was garbage from your cells. It turns out that garbage actually has a lot of information in it. Your cells have membranes, and these membranes get packaged into small things and they slough off, and this information goes all over. A single microRNA, the small nucleic acid thing that sits in these exosomes, can impact 1,000 proteins, right? And you can change the trajectory of those 1,000 proteins by one molecule. And so this suggests the power of what epigenetics can actually do to manipulate what your DNA is. So I think the realization is you are not your DNA. You're really your environment. And I think it's taken people this big shift, that nature versus nurture. This idea that DNA is all you are is being challenged because your environment really has a huge impact on who you become, I think, ultimately.
And before getting to a state of needing to go to a Joe Dispenza meditation retreat or going through this process, are there ways that we can kind of prevent that? Like, what habit pattern is making us sick, essentially?
I think it's this negative thinking, right? In a lot of diseases, it's how you approach and think about it. Not that positive thinking is always going to have this unique effect and create resilience in disease. I think it's a multifactorial thing. It's your genetics, it's the way you think, it's the way you live, it's the way you eat, it's the way you sleep. There's so many things that go into whole person health and how you as an individual express genetically and biochemically and all these things. But there are ways to sort of positively impact those aspects. And I think one of the elements in this that I don't think we've uncovered, but I think a lot of groups are trying to figure this out, is how does genetics interact ultimately with everything else? So I spoke at a precision health conference in December in Arizona, and one of the speakers was Jennifer Lovejoy, who is part of this nonprofit up in the Seattle area called Phenome. And one of the ideas behind this is that every person has a trajectory, right? That if you could track them far enough, you could then actually see where they deviate from this track and bring them back to this thing. And so one of her early slides was this intro, and I've tried to actually duplicate this for a lecture I'm going to give, and I speak to her in a few weeks. I'm going to tell her I'm going to steal her slides. She had this one slide where she had a bookshelf, and on one end of this bookshelf was a book called Genomics, and the other end was a book that she sort of stylized and called the medical record. And underneath Genomics, she wrote, "This is the potential of something that may or may not ever be," because it's your genes, right? And all your mutations and things that you carry. But you need to know that. And then on the other end is this medical record. This is exactly who you are, because this is your experience of your clinical setting, the disease, the health, and all the things you've gone through. And then the next slide filled in all of the in-between, and it's all the omics that you can look at. It's your metabolome, the things you put out of your breathome, your microbiome, your transcriptome, your proteome. All of these ohms then create who and what you are. And we need to know how they interact to really then figure out your trajectory of how to change and behave. It can be an expensive endeavor. And so one of the things we want to try to do with the work we're doing with Joe at these events is, could we come down to a least common cheap denominator that we could track in everyone as a way to get a sense of what everything is happening? Do I think we can do that? Yes. Is it possible? Maybe. I don't know. But I think we have this idea that there may be a dilutable factor that we can get to. It's going to take a long, huge, concerted effort to get there. But we hope that we could track one thing rather than trying to track 1,000 things that we're going to have to identify, which then becomes really expensive for individuals, right?
Yeah, and just like so many different tests and fluids and whatnot.
And we're starting to experiment with easy captures. I think one of the things we see is everyone has, these crazy smartphones that have amazing cameras now. And so in almost every study now, I don't think we're actually limiting. We're doing a video diary capture. And so we have prompted diaries that every night, after you finish your day of meditation, you record a video recording. And then from that recording, we can analyze the words you're using, and your words are an insight into your thinking patterns. Negative thoughts appear in the words in a negative kind of way, and you can see this transformation and shift across the week from negative to positive word usage kinds of things. But then we were only going to do language, and it turns out the videos look so cool they can actually track their face. So you can put a print, basically a mask on their face. You can track their eye blinks. You can track elements of the forehead.
Like tension, probably.
Yeah, you can track their mouth features. You can track their ears. You can track everything about the face from this as they're moving. And then the third thing you can get from this is voice. You can actually take their voice files and track the change in their voice patterns as a predictor. And so now this is something that costs us nothing to capture, because you tag this to all of the biology that we're spending millions of dollars capturing. And then could this voice face language be an easy indicator of all of those biological changes? And now, instead of having to poke your finger or get a blood draw or poop into a tube or breathe into a bag, you just watch your face and look at the words that are coming out of your mouth, and we can tell you all about your biology that way, which is where we're headed, which would be really cool to be able to do.
That would be so cool. And just like, I feel like you guys are really creating this whole body logging and tracking system, like inside and out. And that's so powerful to really get the data behind what's happening.
Yeah.
At the start of, or not even at the start, just throughout your work with the Joe Dispenza community and like learning about these meditations, what has been the most shocking piece of data for you to unveil?
I don't know if there's one piece. It's like everything we look at is mind-blowing, right? Everything we look at shows an effect. There are a few things that we don't see major dramatic effects in, but a lot of things have worked way better than we thought they would work. I would have never predicted that the gut microbiome can change in 7 days. I mean, there's nothing that suggests this unless you're taking an antibiotic or you kill everything. They could actually see changes in the types of microbes and other things that are populating in that space. And we see this across a very large group of individuals. We see this dramatic shift from day 0 to day 7.
And so it's filled with more like probiotics
we've actually identified a series of probiotics that go up in all comers, right? Irrespective of disease. Now we're starting to parse out what happens in healthies versus others. I would love to come up with a meditation yogurt that you take every day and puts you into this state. We think we'll be able to get there eventually, right? If we know what an individual is creating, could you find these non-pathogenic bacteria that then we can populate as a probiotic that creates this mental state where you are more resilient and get people further and faster along that track?
Wow. So if a cancer patient just came to you today and was just like, I just got diagnosed, I want to infuse meditation into my healing modalities, like, where do I start?
Yeah.
What would your answer be?
I would try to find, if you don't want to jump completely into a week-long event, Joe does these things called progressives, which give you a start, right? A mindset of how to approach and just get your feet wet into the space. They happen a couple times a year in different places, and it's a short weekend event. not very expensive to just get acclimated. That's a good start, I think. The other thing is the books. I think read the books. There are meditations from him that are available online, so access those and just start, right? Doesn't hurt. I think the real thing is, if you're truly interested in this space, to see if this is a way to evolve, it's to consider going to a week-long event. And I think it's not a business plug or anything like that. I've seen the transformation that happens at these. It is a way to learn the information. I'm a procrastinator by heart. You can tell me you have to watch 30 hours of videos. I won't do it. I can't. I don't have 30 hours of my life.
Yeah.
But if I'm forced to be at a place where I can't do anything else but learn and experience and do things, then you're going to spend the time and energy to do it. And so for a lot of us, we have this busyness in our lives that prevents us from taking full advantage of an experience. And for those individuals, I think a week long really helps to leave that stress and environment back and to be committed to an experience. If you're going through this transformative thing, it's one of the best things you can do, right? It's to learn how to harness your mind and body in this way to optimize it for the things that are going to come. Chemo, radiation, those things are traumatic, right? And the other aspect, I think, is how you yourself deal with this condition with the loved ones around you. I think a lot of diseases impact not only you, but everyone else that you're tied and connected to. One of the things I see in myself going through an experience like this is it allows me to self-regulate and interact with the people who are around me. You tend to treat the people you love the worst, right? Because you think you can, because they're not going to go away. And I, as a father, I can tell you I've done things that are not fun, and I know but you get angry, right? And you're hungry or you're tired or you lash out at your kids, and you know it's the wrong thing to do, but you do it. One of the things I see with this is it helps you regulate those negative kinds of behaviors. And I think when you create that positive change, it happens in so many dimensions of your life, not only you as an individual, but how you interact with the rest of the world. And it's the start of a change, I think.
Truly. And I remember the first kind of weeks of getting into the meditations, like when it was right after I got diagnosed, and I was definitely one of the throw in the kitchen sink at it. I tried everything, and I learned so much through that, and I wouldn't have changed anything. I really, really benefited from that. But these techniques allowed me to even see and feel the hope that this didn't have to be like my end sentence. There was just another reality that I would thrive and live and have even a better life than I did pre-cancer. And I feel like these meditations allowed me to get into that and feel what it would feel like to be there, and it just like jump to that timeline that I would have been waiting for, essentially. Like, it's like, why wait to feel healthy when you can kind of really try to embody it now? And how does that change your cells? And it's kind of the mind-body connection of being like, you are telling your body what to do at every point. Like, okay, I'm raising my arms. Can you get to that depth of level of changing your cells? And it truly feels like I developed some of those skills, and it was huge. And I didn't go to the week-long event. It is costly, but it's like there's so many, he does put out so much resources on how to integrate this into your life. And I think I was doing like 1 to 2 hours every day on this work, but even so, it was like the dedication, the depth.
I think the other thing, as I'm thinking and I'm listening to you talk, a good place to start for someone who's newly diagnosed or is interested in this space are the stories of transformation. I think seeing the change in someone and what their experience is, and there's so many stories around cancer in these stories of transformation, and they make you cry. I mean, there's this human and I've told this story, and I can't remember if it was in Source, but as a human, when someone comes up to me at an event and tells me that I've cured my cancer, I've been meditating And this woman at San Diego actually sent me her data, and she, in one of her meditations, saw this number that was being tracked for her cancer diagnosis go from this astronomically high level to almost to zero. And 2 weeks or some time point after the event that she had done in last year, she went and got this thing done, and it was up here, and it had gone down to almost zero, not quite zero, but she saw this in her meditation and her mystical vision or whatever she had. And I think to myself, oh my God, I'm so happy for you as a human and just interacting with this. As a scientist, I'm like thinking in the back of my head, this is bullshit. There's no way. And I think I did talk about this in Source. It's so unbelievable, the stories you hear, but there's so many of these stories that it has to be believable at some stage, right? And I want to figure out a way to study some element of this. There is a truth to this that I don't think we've captured yet of how it shouldn't happen, yet it does over and over and over again.
What is your favorite response to skeptics?
I think skepticism is great. You have to have it, right? If you don't, then I think you get labeled this Kool-Aid drinker that just sort of goes along for the ride, and less intellectual. So I think you can approach this experience in multiple different kinds of ways. You can sort of explore this as, I'm just going to believe everything and go into this, and you'll see a transformation. You can also go in and question everything, but keep an open mind, right? You question it. It's not that you have to believe everything. You still question it, but keep that mind open enough for the possibilities that exist to go through that experience. There's still a lot of things I've changed my perspective on at these week-long events and experiences I've had. There's other things that I still can't resolve in my head, and I'm still skeptical. The coherence healings are one of them. I think a lot of it is a placebo thing, but then a lot of it is not, because we see biological changes in heart rate variability and other things that show that there's a connectedness of individuals.
And also, placebo is still a treatment.
It is. If I could identify a placebo molecule, I'd be a billionaire, right? Yeah. I'd do quite well. But at the end of it, I think we don't have the devices. I think this is where we're struggling. And this is where a lot of my mental energy is focused, at least for this next year. How are we going to measure what's happening in that room? Are we going to be able to get plants and worms and cells and other things to become sensors, right? Could we actually create biological sensors? Could we create devices with other physics and other people that are in this space? Are there photon sensors, right? One of the things that people are thinking of in this space is that there may be light energy and other things that come off individuals when they're healing. We don't know. I mean, it's sort of a black box right now. What is the energy that a person's creating, and how do you measure it?
And isn't it, I can't remember if this was in the documentary or outside of it, but it's like we emit a frequency and how many feet away from us? It's like
a couple feet, right? I think there's an aura that sits around us that we have this field. And we were talking before we started about this idea of consciousness and one of the places to really study this is in anesthesia. Like when someone goes under a general anesthetic, they're gone, right? They're essentially like to the point of death. Their consciousness is not there. It's gone. It goes somewhere. Where does it go? Is there a cloud that it gets uploaded to that it's sort of sitting somewhere, and then you wake them up and that essentially comes right back into them and it's there? And so that's one of the big questions is there something that's happening in these deep meditations and mystical experiences where your consciousness is connecting with something at a deeper level? And is there an energetic aspect to it? Is it electromagnetic? Is it light? Is it sound? Is it a combination of all of these things? And we could do reductionist approach to study this. We've done some Faraday cage experiments that limit electromagnetic energy, and we see limiting of effects at events, right? With these random event generators and things. We've got some really cool ideas around Faraday cages and things happening.
What is a Faraday cage?
So Faraday cage is a metal cage made out of specific metals that then limits electromagnetic energy from interacting. So it basically dissipates that electromagnetic energy. So the idea is if you put something inside a Faraday cage, and if that thing can be manipulated by electromagnetic energy, then that electromagnetic energy can't get in because the Faraday cage is blocking it. And so you shouldn't be able to manipulate that system.
Whoa. Okay. Interesting. And I feel like our audience, a lot of them have been under anesthesia.
Yeah.
So they probably like have experienced what that's like. And for me, it was just like, okay, you're counting down and then you wake up.
Right.
And like, I remember the first time I did it for my first surgery, I woke up and I was just bawling. Like I could not, it was like sobbing, and they gave me like all sorts of things to like come down. But how is it? So why is it not just sleeping?
Because it's beyond sleep, right? I used to give these lectures on anesthesia in the department to undergrads or graduate students and pharmacy students. And I would show these two examples of what my colleagues in anesthesia call the anesthesia. And one of them is it's the same as death by lethal injection. The only difference is you wake up afterwards, right? And so you're literally taken to the point. Someone has to do surgery on you. So you can't be mentally there because then you're going to experience pain and other things. So you basically shut the brain off to the point where you're essentially dead. And then you turn that anesthetic off and you come back. One is, I was just talking to our chair this past week, and we were sort of ruminating on this idea of consciousness and anesthesia. And I think that one of the things that hasn't been cataloged is what happens to people when they go under anesthesia and they have traumatic things. There's certain surgeries that are quite routine when you go under an anesthetic, but then something happens and it doesn't become routine where you're losing lots of blood and other things. And is that comparable to a near-death experience? And so so let's say someone goes in for something that they're doing in their abdomen, and the surgery goes completely perfect, exactly as it's planned, no blood loss, no different effects, and that person wakes up. What is their experience of what just happened? Versus, let's say you have a second individual that goes through that same surgery, but something happens where a vessel is nicked and they bleed out and they lose a lot of blood and all this stuff happening. And they come back and they're whole again, but they've had a very different physical experience. So is that more of a near-death-like thing? And are they going to have neuronal circuits that are changed in this different kind of way? That it's that unique, different experience that then changes them in a different capacity. I think there's spaces to study this. And so we were talking about this. It's like a needle in the haystack, right? I think Ruth was saying that at least once a week, something like this happens, but you have hundreds of people that go through surgeries. And so you'd really have to follow all 100 people to then figure out who that one person is that this happens to then see if there's a biological shift that's unique in this person. I've sat next to a lot of people at these events that describe near-death experiences, and a lot of these near-death experiences are like these deep meditations that they have. They're not quite as dramatic of that experience, but they get close to that. And there's something about mind and consciousness and where we go and what happens at these points of anesthesia or death or other things that I think are a key element to this that we haven't unwrapped yet.
So are there biomarkers for people who've been through near-death experiences? Like, can you actually tell by looking at
people are starting to look at this, right? I think some of the hypotheses are that when you die, that there is this huge burst of DMT that gets released in your body.
Yeah.
This natural psychedelic, which gives you this path towards this journey. And maybe a near-death experience has some of this element of a psychedelic that gets released in our body and it ties us to this mystical state. Who knows? One of the things we've been interested in these meditations is does that individual create endogenous DMT that's being released and creating this effect? I do this survey in one of my talks. I give a couple talks during the week-long event, and it's this survey in a paper that was published in 2012. And it was looking at fMRI brain work in people who were taking psilocybin, which is the active ingredient of magic mushrooms, versus placebo. And the survey asks like 10 or so questions about this state. And there's no denying who's on psilocybin and placebo, because the placebo are answering all these things like your time your perception of time changes, your dreamlike qualities. You see the world in sound and all these other things that are really mystical in nature. And the people who have taken psilocybin are answering like 100% affirmative. There's one or two people in the placebo that are answering the same way. So
What do you mean affirmative?
Like that yes, they're experiencing.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
And as you should, right? If you're on a psychedelic agent, you're having these psychedelic experiences. And so you're seeing things in a dreamlike quality. You're seeing more color. You're seeing more time shifts. You're seeing more of these things that you don't normally, like when we look at the world right now, we don't see it the same way as if you were on a psychedelic agent.
Yeah.
So in this room full of usually 2,000 people, I asked this question. I do the entire survey, the psilocybin survey. 80% of the room, almost for all of these 10 questions, is raising their hand in the affirmative. And of course, my next slide is, how many of you ate magic mushroom this morning? There's always one guy in the room that raises his hand. But people are experiencing something that is not normal, right? It's you shouldn't be able to close your eyes and have these crazy things that you're experience. It suggests that we're creating a pharmacology. And I have to suspect that there is some natural psychedelic that's being created. The hard part is, how do we figure this out? How do we measure it?
Yeah.
So we've got some ways that we're actually looking at this right now.
It's so interesting. Yeah, because I feel like through these meditations, I was able to tap into a happiness that I thought was long gone. Like, I thought it was like, oh, that's like a childhood happiness thing, whatever. It's like, oh no, if you get in the right state and if you're like in this, you can get to these levels of just like bliss that are hard to even imagine.
I hear so many stories where you always think that it's experiences that lead to drugs. And so you're the opposite of this space. There's so many people that have gone on plant journeys in, South America and other places. And they're like, this has led us to Joe. And it's the experience that you create when you take psilocybin or ayahuasca or other things, that you can recreate this. And the power is to know that you could do it yourself.
Yes.
Right? That you don't have to ingest something, but you can close your eyes and you can put your brain into the state that's exactly like that experience, is empowering and elevating for a lot of individuals. And I think that plant journey leads people to this deep meditative experience as well.
Yeah, and then you're not dependent on anything, and you can do meditation with no bad things. Like, there's no bad side effects of meditation.
Yeah.
What would you do if you got the answer? Because you're a scientist, researcher, professor, and in this Joe Dispenza world too.
I think the first thing is, I think I'm a pessimistic thinker, right? I think the worst case scenario and everything. I think the challenge for me would be to think of the positive element of all of this. And I think that's what I would fixate really hard on creating that positive energy environment, looking at it from, how am I going to kick this thing rather than how is this going to kick me kind of thing. So creating that positive energy kind of thing. And then it's to really throw the kitchen sink at it, right? I've seen this stuff in the Joe space. I have lots of excuses for not meditating. I meet with my Thursday group most Thursdays, and it's an amazing experience. Yet I can't find 15, 20 minutes in my day to do it. There's some days where I can, and I'll do it, and it's a great day. For me, I think one of the things I've learned through the Joe meditations is that I don't have to listen to the same meditations to get to that same state. I'm at a place where now when I go to bed, I do a mental rehearsal that's my own practice, that's learned from what Joe has taught me about how to take things in and out and those kinds of things. And my brain meditates in that way, and I get that contemplative experience as well. And so I think I would augment that, right? I would start spending a lot more meditative time doing those sorts of things. And then I would look at every option there is from the Western perspective. I think people have this fear of pharmacology and drugs, but science is science, right? There's a biology to a lot of these things, and there's a usefulness to it, I think. And I think, again, this idea of throwing the kitchen sink at it. So that would be sort of my approach to the healing aspect. I think the other aspect is I'm a workaholic, and one of the things that my wife reminds me of all the time is that when you're gone, the kids are not going to remember the time you were at work making money to have them live the lifestyle you're at. They're going to remember the time when you were thrifting with them or hanging out with them on the couch doing those things. And so I think it would really change that shift. What do I value in terms of work product? And I don't know if, I think work would still be a part of who I am and what I would do, but I think it would be a much more dramatic shift towards that family environment, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because time it's hard to, because with your work you are helping so many people, so it's not just like, oh, do my day job versus spend time with your kids. It's like spend time with your kids and also help get research and data and like change so many people's lives too. So it's a tough one. What do you wish more cancer patients knew, given your work and background and experience?
Yeah, I think it's this realization that mind is really powerful, and it's powerful in ways that we were not taught. And I think we're taught very early to think of the mind as a way to solve problems that are external. And I think one of the realizations I've come to is that it is a really powerful tool to solve internal problems as well. And the fact that mind can change biology is transformative. I think if people realize that early enough, it's a power, I think, that we have. One of the things I meet with the youth community at these events, and I think the discussion turned to X-Men. I think
Probably.
I mean, this idea that there are powerful beings that really can harness the power of the mind. And I think this is where we're going to find these outliers that can do crazy, amazing things. And it's going to give us insights into how all of us can change in a unique kind of way. And I think it's really the next evolution of who we are is up here.
Yeah, and it's like it makes so much sense. It's like, oh, the mind and body are connected. Like, why is that shocking to people, you know? Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have, or something that you wanted to share?
No, I mean, that was a great conversation. I think we hit a lot of topics.
Yeah, and my mind's only further blown by everything that we covered, and just this world of that we do have control over how we handle a diagnosis and how we like handle our mind through these different changes and the things that we don't have control over. And so it's really hopeful and inspiring to like, we don't have to sit in our circumstances. Like there are ways to change it.
Yeah. And I guess I'll leave with this sort of thought, and I think about this quite a lot. And I don't think that a week-long event is the answer to longevity. And I don't think it's false hope that everything's going to be perfect. I think that one of the things it teaches us is how to accept the things that are happening, right? That there is this journey that we're on. And I think as a person who has this faith background, I mean, one of the things that's certain is we're going to die, right? It's going to happen.
Wait, what?
Right. And it's, I think, how you go through that experience. My fear of death is not the aspect of dying, but it's the aspect of what you leave behind, at least for me, right? It's what's going to happen with my wife, the kids, and the dogs, and the house. And the crazy thing about this is that it all goes on, right? And I learned this when my mother died. It was a devastating experience for me. And now it's, decade plus later, and the world moves on. And it's this sort of fleeting aspect of it. But what I think I see at these events is it really, it creates resiliency in lots of individuals. It teaches them about the power of their body, but it also teaches them a huge depth of acceptance of who and what they are in this human condition. And I think that's important. It allows them to live what we were just talking about, right? Not long, but really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And where can people find more about your work or support what you're doing, any of that stuff?
Yeah, so one of the crazy, amazing things about this is the work is supported by the community. And so Inner Science Research Fund has really come to full force to help us do all this stuff. A lot of the things we're doing, we can't get federal funding for because it's just way outside the box, and which is fine, right? We'll still keep applying for those grants. But it's really the community that's supporting all of the crazy, amazing things that we're thinking and developing and launching. So go to Inner Science Research Fund. If you're at an event, they usually have a booth there, and you can come interact with them and learn all the amazing things that they're doing. They really have support for the community. They do weekend meditations and lots of gatherings and book clubs and things like that as well. It's a good way to get involved in the community. And then just go to our websites, right? Inner Science puts out all our research. The other great advantage that they give us is every paper that we publish is made free to the world. We make it open source so that anyone can download it at any time, read it, digest it, understand it, kind of thing as well.
Amazing. Hemal, thank you so much for being on, and thank you for the work that you do.
Yep.
I just want to say thank you so much for finding us. We're building a place to talk everything cancer, and since we're just getting started, there's one small thing that you can help us grow. Hit the follow or subscribe or review or share button or whatever button wherever you're listening. It really helps this project reach more people who may really need it right now. On top of that, tell us what you want to hear about, and we'll do our best to deliver. By the way, we share perspectives and stories, but never medical advice. So please talk to your medical team for guidance.